Welcome to the Deep Dive. We're here to explore fascinating topics and how the things we learn really shape who we are. Today, we're looking at something that's usually invisible, but incredibly powerful: textbooks, the ones used by young students.
Yeah, our mission for this deep dive is to unpack the subtle ways gender gets portrayed in these books. We're digging into a specific study, a qualitative analysis, to give you a shortcut to understanding these hidden messages.
That's right. Our main source here is a 2021 thesis, or scriptsy, from Umratun Nida at Sharif Hidayatullah State Islamic University, Jakarta. It's called The Representation of Gender Stereotype in English Textbook for 10th Grade. And it looked really closely at one particular book, Be Smart in English 1 from 2016.
Okay, and why should you, the listener, care about this? Textbooks seem so it's neutral, right? Well, that's the thing, isn't it? We see them as just facts, but they're actually transmitting values, societal norms, attitudes, all very subtly. And what's inside those pages, it can actually limit a student's own sense of potential. It shapes how they think they should act, look, maybe even what job they can aim for. So this deep dive is about uncovering those hidden dynamics for you.
Okay, so these influences are subtle. How did the study actually go about finding them? What was the method?
Right, so the researcher used what's called qualitative content analysis.
Yeah.
It's not just counting things, although counting is part of it. It's more about digging deep into the text, the images, looking for patterns, for the meaning behind what's presented.
Okay, so like reading between the lines.
Exactly. Reading between the lines, looking at everything. They examined several specific things to find gender stereotypes, like how often male and female characters appeared, who spoke first in dialogues, they call that firstness. Also, the jobs characters had, the words used to describe them, adjectives, and what activities they were shown doing. And they used established frameworks from researchers like Dykman and Eagley and others to analyze all that data.
Got it. So let's get into those findings. What was the first big thing that stood out from Be Smart in English 1, just in terms of who was even in the book?
Yeah, the first thing that really hits you is just the raw numbers. It's quite imbalanced. So they counted 398 times characters appeared overall, females. Only 163 times, that's 41%.
41%.
Whereas males appeared 235 times. That's 59%.
Wow. Okay, so a 5-9-4-1 split, that's an 18% difference?
Exactly. And according to Stockdale's research from 2006, anything over 5% is seen as a significant imbalance.
Yeah.
So 18% is really quite large.
Huh. And what does that mean practically? What kind of message does that imbalance send?
Well, it implicitly suggests whose stories are more central, right? Who is more visible, whose perspective is maybe considered more default. It raises questions about value and presence.
That makes sense. Can you give us some concrete examples? Like, where did this show up most clearly? Picture? Stories?
Oh, definitely. It was pretty consistent. So take the visuals, the pictures, and illustrations. There were 49 of them. Male characters showed up in 30 of those. That's 61%. Female characters, only 8 times.
Well, only 8 times in pictures out of 49.
Yeah. Stark, isn't it? And then in the reading passages, the actual stories, out of 33 passages, 21 were mainly about male characters, compared to just 7 focused on female characters.
Okay.
And looking unit by unit, most of them leaned male. Unit I, for instance, had a 60% difference favoring males. Now, there are exceptions. Unit 6 actually had more female characters, 67%. But the overall trend across the whole book definitely tilted towards male representation.
So the sheer visibility is skewed. But you mentioned something called firstness. Who speaks first in dialogues? That sounds really subtle. What did they find there?
Yeah, firstness. It's about who initiates, who takes the lead in a conversation between genders. The study looked at 7 dialogues where both male and female characters were talking. And males spoke first, 5 out of those 7 times. That's 71%.
71%?
While females only initiated twice. 29%.
So that's a 42% gap just in who starts the conversation.
Exactly. It suggests, males are more often shown taking the initiative, setting the conversational agenda, basically.
That's fascinating. Can you give us examples? Like, what kinds of conversations were started by males versus females? Did the topics differ?
They did seem to differ, yeah. The female examples of speaking first were things like a customer service agent helping someone, or a girl asking how a friend was doing. Kind of service-oriented or relational.
Yeah.
The male examples of speaking first included things like asking about a book someone borrowed, asking a doctor about a health issue, or asking for permission to be late from the office.
So more like seeking information or permission, sort of taking charge of the situation.
Yeah, you could interpret it that way. It often positions them as more proactive or perhaps even in a position of needing something, or directing the interaction.
Okay, so we've got visibility, who speaks first. Now, what about jobs, careers? How did the textbook portray occupational roles for boys and girls?
Right, this is another area where the imbalance was really striking. The book showed 51 different occupations in total, but only 11 of those were ever associated with female characters.
Only 11 out of 51.
Yeah, compared to 40 occupations linked to male characters.
Wow, that's a huge difference, a 56% gap.
It is. And for you listening, think about how powerful that is. These lists of jobs, they're like these invisible guides suggesting what's normal or possible for boys versus girls. It can really reinforce those limiting stereotypes about work.
Were there any jobs shown for both men and women? Maybe some common ground?
A few, yes. But even then, often with a skew. Teacher was shown, but it was 57% male, 43% female.
Huh, interesting. Teacher is often seen as female-dominated.
Right. And manager was 67% male, 33% female. The
Right.
one job that was actually equal was doctor, 50% male, 50% female.
Okay, so doctor was balanced. That's something.
It is. It's a positive outlier in the data, for sure.
And what about the jobs that were only shown for one gender? What did those lists look like?
Okay, so for female-only jobs, there were just 6. Officer, teller, housewife, speech therapist, accountant, and tour guide.
A lot of service or caring roles, plus housewife, and accountant is interesting, sometimes seen as male.
Yeah, it showed up female here.
Yeah.
Now, compare that to the male-only list. 33 different jobs.
30.
Yep. And it included a lot of leadership roles.
Mhm.
President, headmaster, politician, army, director, lots of science and tech. Engineer, inventor, scientist, and business roles too. Entrepreneur, industrialist, businessman, shopkeeper. It just paints a much broader, often more prestigious picture of potential careers for males.
So the scope of ambition presented is just vastly different. Okay, let's shift from roles to descriptions. How are these characters actually described? Did the words themselves carry bias?
Oh, absolutely. Language is so powerful. The study found a really clear pattern in the adjectives used. Generally speaking, men were more often described using words related to their physical state or their intelligence,
Okay.
while women were more frequently linked to emotional states.
Can you give some specific examples of those adjectives? What words were being attached to whom?
Sure. Take smart. Used 6 times for males, only twice for females.
Right.
Physical state, words like tired or exhausted, 9 times for males, just once for females. And the word strong, only ever used for male characters, never for female characters.
Only men were strong.
Yep. Now, on the emotional side, sad was used more for females 3 times versus 1 for males. Angry, interestingly, was used slightly more for males twice versus once for females. And physical appearance descriptions were also telling. Males got things like fat, thin, short, long hair. Females only described once as beautiful.
Just beautiful, that's it.
That was the only physical descriptor found for a female character. And maybe one of the most subtle points versus once for females. And physical appearance descriptions were also telling. Males got things like fat, thin, short, long hair. Females only described once as beautiful.
Just beautiful, that's it.
That was the only physical descriptor found for a female character. And maybe one of the most subtle points, words relating to wealth or status, like poor and rich,
Yeah.
exclusively used for male characters, never for females, which implicitly ties financial standing and success primarily to men in this context.
That's a really subtle but powerful message. Okay, last area. Activities. What were these characters actually doing in the book? Did the actions reinforce or challenge stereotypes?
This area was a bit more mixed, actually. There was still an overall imbalance in the number of activities, 53 for females, 67 for males, about a 12% difference. But the types of activities showed some interesting things.
Okay, like what? Were there any surprises? Activities that went against the grain?
Yeah, there were some. For instance, cooking, often stereotyped as female, was shown almost equally. 6 females cooking, 4 males cooking.
Oh, okay.
Driving was also shown being done by females. And some really non-traditional ones, like smoking and even gorilla, were attributed to female characters.
Huh. Gorilla. That's unexpected.
Right? And female characters were also shown doing various university-level educational activities. So there were definitely moments that pushed back against typical stereotypes.
That's good to hear. But I sense a but coming.
Yeah.
Where did the activities reinforce the stereotypes?
Yeah, the but is pretty significant. Domestic chores, things like washing, taking care of children, sweeping, helping parents, those were only ever shown being done by female characters exclusively.
Okay, so the domestic sphere was still firmly female.
Pretty much. And conversely, male characters were mostly shown doing things outdoors or social activities or adventurous stuff like playing football, basketball, riding bikes, hiking, working on electronics. And another specific one, the act of giving advice to a son was only shown being done by a father, a male character.
So it's kind of men active in the world, women active in the home, with a few interesting exceptions.
That's a fair summary. It's a mixed message, but one that ultimately still leans into many traditional gender roles, especially around domesticity versus public or adventurous life.
This brings us to a really crucial point. We've looked at all this data, the numbers, the roles, the words, the actions. How did the authors of the textbook see all this? Did they intend to create these patterns? Were they aware?
That's a great question. And the researcher actually managed to interview one of the authors, Mariana, and she confirmed that, yes, the publisher and the authors did think about avoiding gender stereotypes. They felt it was important, especially for the millennial era, as she put it.
Okay, so there was conscious intent there. That's positive. But clearly the results didn't fully match the intent. What did the author say about that disconnect? What was their focus?
Right, so she admitted they didn't quite hit a perfect balance with, say, how often characters appeared. They thought some sections were balanced, but maybe not overall. Their main focus, she said, when trying to avoid stereotypes, was really on the activities, like making a point to show a boy sweeping the floor, for example.
Okay, so activities were top of mind. What about the other things, like who speaks first, or the adjectives?
That's key. She explicitly said that firstness and the pattern of adjectives weren't things they specifically focused on or maybe even thought about during writing. It was more about what just comes to your mind.
Mhm.
And the massive imbalance in occupations, she said that was sort of unrealized or maybe just reflected common associations or even the difficulty of finding, say, historical figures who fit certain roles but were female. She also mentioned how hard it can be to find source materials like authentic passages or pictures that already show gender equality. They were sometimes limited by the resources available to them.
So it sounds like a classic case of good intentions, but maybe unconscious biases creeping in or practical hurdles getting in the way.
Exactly. It really highlights that disconnect that can happen. You can genuinely want to promote equality, but societal norms are so deeply ingrained, and finding balanced source material is such a challenge that stereotypes can still end up being reinforced unintentionally.
This whole deep dive really underscores something important, doesn't it? That the books we learn from, they aren't just neutral containers of facts. They're like cultural snapshots.
Yeah, cultural artifacts, reflecting the beliefs and, yes, the biases of the time they were created, even when trying not to.
So even with authors trying to do the right thing, these stereotypes can persist, quietly shaping how students see themselves and the world. Which leads to a final thought for you, our listener. If our educational materials, even well-intentioned ones, can carry these hidden messages, what's our role? What responsibility do we have as critical thinkers to look deeper, to question the assumptions baked into our learning? What part of this deep dive stands out most to you?